Young lady, do you give me permission to publish this interview on social media?
Yes, sir, I do.
Can I get your name, please?
My name is Tamara Cheryl.
Tamara. Where are you located?
I'm outside of Dallas.
Outside of Dallas. Do you have a happy childhood?
Um, I could say I have a few happy memories, but no, I wouldn't say it was a happy childhood.
You married? Got kids?
I am actually currently married. I have 4 children, and I have a couple additional bonus children.
Why was your childhood not happy?
Growing up, I was in a family of 8 children, so we were very poor. We lived My parents lived off the government. Going to get an ice cream was a chore. It was a treat that we got every once in a blue moon. So first of all, the poverty was part of it, I guess, stress on the parents, but my mother was an addict since I was about 8 years old. She began her journey through addiction. And I had a stepfather who had his own issues, and it played in with my mother's. And it became a battle, a fight throughout her addiction. Caused a big family split, and because we didn't belong to my stepfather legally, he couldn't take us when he left, and so we were left with our mother, who was hardly ever to be found.
Did you have any specific favorite childhood memory?
My grandmother, before she passed, she used to do Christmas at her house. And when she did Christmas at her house, she made it where all the family got together, even though it was a lot of ruckus. It was a lot. There was like 32 of us, I believe, of grandkids. And she spent the entire year saving up and buying Christmas gifts so that each one of us would be able to open a couple of gifts at her house. And she would make a big dinner and homemade candy. And that happened up until about I was probably 10. And then, just all of the stuff that happened, it split everybody apart. And there was some molestation that was going on that caused the entire family to split. So that stopped about 10. But I would say that was a couple of good memories through the years.
Well, young lady, this is an interview on spiritual warfare. Before we go into that, you and your husband are in the ministry, correct?
My husband and I are ordained ministers. I do have an associate's degree in theology and an associate's degree in psychology that I've earned throughout the years. And we both are youth pastors at our church. I see myself in a lot of these teens. I myself, because of my situation story, I'll get into later, but because of that, it allows me to connect to these teens.
Well, young lady, this is an interview on spiritual warfare. What do you understand about demons?
Demons are very real. A lot of people believe, and I myself, I didn't know anything about God. Brother, I didn't know anything about God growing up. But what I do know is, even though I didn't know God, I knew demons. It's a very ugly thing that the world is seeing this red demonic being with horns, but they are so misled and not seeing the true enemy in his true form. A lot of people don't realize that the serpent didn't come into the garden as a huge dragon breathing down their necks and screaming at them. We have been misled. I know for me that in spiritual warfare, I have literally fought off a lot of things that were brought to me in soul ties as I was sold as a young girl. I was molested and raped since I was about 7 years old. My first attempt at suicide was a demonic experience for me. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew that there was this thing that would come and visit me in my dreams. And I remember sitting in the living room, my first attempt to commit suicide, I'm going to be honest with you. I knew what I was doing at 8 years old. And I had, at that point, had been molested for almost a full year at that point. And my parents knew. And because they were poor, they kept the guy as a babysitter because they couldn't afford anything else. And so they kept him. And brother, I sat in the corner of this living room. And I'll never forget, I kept hearing, "You're disgusting. Nobody even cares if you live or die. Nobody cares." And I remember looking up at everybody moving about the house. Mind you, we had 10 people in this household. Everybody's playing, kids are playing. My parents are talking and watching TV. And I'm sitting in the middle of this floor over in the corner, and I'm just hearing this and I'm watching it. And the enemy was showing me, right? This enemy was showing me how I was so isolated, how I was so unloved. And it began to continuously just go in my head. And it was so strong that I got up and I went and drank an entire, back in the day, they had these really big, about the size of a water bottle, deals of chloroseptic spray that I had watched them give to my stepfather's mom all the time. And so I went and I drank the entire bottle because I couldn't handle it. See, I didn't know that I was battling with something here. I didn't understand any of it. I was 8 years old. But what I did know is that the enemy had come to me, that something had come to me and told me I wasn't worth saving. I wasn't worth living. Nobody cared if I was here. And then showed me in the visual, right? Everybody playing. The warfare that I fought as my innocence was taken at such a young age that I couldn't even perceive what it meant to be a child, to be honest with you. And then as I grew older, more things began to happen. And I've physically watched demons stare me in the face through my mom and through some other people. I know a lot of people think demons are other people or outside of your own world. But see, the warfare is that when unhealed people raise new people, their unhealedness goes from them to you. Some would call that a generational curse, but it's demonic. And if you don't know what you're warring against, you could never fight it nor win it. And I was completely unaware that I was in a warfare, and I was completely unaware that there was someone that cared enough about me, even though I had continued to be molested, even though I continued to be isolated and alone, even though my innocence was taken. It was someone who loved me, and that someone was Jesus, and I didn't know that.
When people know darkness, it's hard to believe that God can. When you understand darkness the way that in my mind I was understanding it at the time, it was hard to believe that God was stronger. It was hard for me to understand that there was a God that was stronger. I had a woman that used to cut my hair, and now I'm talking about I was in my 20s, I guess, early, yeah, 20s. I was mid to late 20s, and this woman used to cut my hair. I had no idea, but the girl was taking my hair and performing witchcraft on it. And God showed me that this woman was sending it, but it wasn't her, it was a demon.
Yes.
And this thing sat on top of me one night, and it was holding me down by my shoulders, and it was sucking the breath out of me. It leaned down in my face, and I was nose to nose with this thing. And it says, "Will you serve Satan?" And I said, "No." And as soon as I can't tell you if it was in my mind, in my spirit, whatever, I couldn't get the words out of my mouth. But as soon as I said Jesus, this thing turned me loose.
I wanted to tell you I have a similar experience. But I want to fast forward. Rewind. Let me rewind. So as a child, after my suicide attempt, mind you, I did die in the ambulance ride just a few minutes after they picked me up. They pumped my stomach twice and I came back to. And when I woke up, I was actually made fun of. I was called stupid. They laughed at me. It was a weird situation. After that, my mother had God didn't reveal to me until later on why my mother went down the road that she did, but later on God showed me my mother was also molested as a young girl on a school bus, I mean on a church bus. And that's why she wouldn't introduce God to us, because she had hate for God. And so she didn't teach us about God. But when she found out that I was being molested by this babysitter, a young man who had some mental issues, right? She went into a deep depression. It triggered something in her and she couldn't deal with it. And because she felt like she had no way out, she escaped through the drugs to be numb and to try to avoid and hear what her conscience was telling her. And so God had shown me that years down the road, and the demons had, the voices, the darkness had gotten so bad that my father would make me ride with my mother everywhere, because sometimes she would disappear. She wouldn't come home for hours or days. And so he got to the point where he would make me ride with her. And when he made me ride with her, she would still go and get high, but she would just take me around with her. And then she started running out of money. And once she ran out of money, she would rent out the car. Well, this one specific time, she left me in the car. And the guy offered money up for me in order for her to get her high. And that was the first time that she accepted it. And as time went on, this happened more and more often. So I would beg my father, please don't make me go with her. Please don't make me go with her. But he knew that I was the only one that had sense enough of what was going on that would tell the truth. Mind you, I'm not the oldest. I'm the second oldest. But I was the only one that would have sense enough to be honest with him and tell him the truth. And the entire time I would get on to my mother. And one specific time she was driving around, and we had a minivan, and I was in the very, very back of the minivan, and it was probably 2 a.m. And she was doing her stuff, and she pulled up to a store and wanted me to go in and get her water. And I will never forget, the light was behind her. So how I seen this, I don't know. But I believe I stared the enemy in the face that day. I was probably about 9 when it happened. She turned and looked at me when I told her I didn't want to go in, and her face was like a pale gray. And it was almost like a distorted picture, like you couldn't focus in on her facial features. And her eyes were dark. And she said, "Get out." And it shook me so bad. I got out and I went in to get water, but it shook me so bad. And I would never forget that. And as time went on, she continued to get me out to the highest bidder. Um, Whenever she would run out of money, and my dad at the time was completely unaware of anything that was going on. I don't even think he really wanted to see it. Later on that year, my mother had been gone for a couple of days, and when she came home, I woke up to them fighting, and I could hear somebody muffly yelling for help, and I couldn't make it out. But when I woke up off the couch, because I was waiting up, he would make me wait up with him. All the other children would go to sleep and he would make me wait up with him. I got up and she was on his chest with her knee on his throat, trying to get his wallet out of his hand. The money wasn't in there. I had already hidden it. Finally, she comes upstairs. They stopped fighting. I just kept yanking at her, and they stopped fighting. And she came upstairs and she sat in silence as he just led into her. He just, called her stupid and a failure and a horrible mom and a disgrace, and just kept going at her, kept going at her. And I watched the life leave her face. Mind you, she was already pale. Her lips were already kind of like a bluish color, like a bluish black color. And she got up and went to the kitchen, and it was so quiet. Mind you, I didn't know God. So all I knew is I kept hearing this voice say, "Go check, go check, go check." And so I got up and I went in there. And as I grabbed a hold of her and tapped her, I peeked around her and she was standing over the sink, and she turned slightly. One hand was holding on by threads, hanging as she was trying to grip the knife with that hand and cut the other. And I'll never forget running around the neighborhood calling for an ambulance, trying to bang on doors at 3 o'clock in the morning. Because, back then we didn't have cell phones and we were poor, so we didn't have a landline either. And so I was banging on door after door after door, trying to get someone please answer and call an ambulance. And I believe that night I was in spiritual warfare. I was left to clean up the blood that was laying all over the house from the kitchen to the front porch. I have a few hours at this moment before I have to get my siblings up for school, and I didn't want them to visually see any of this mess. And so as I was scrubbing, I would hear, "This is what you're meant to do. This is who you're going to be. This is all you're ever going to get." That night, I know that God was speaking to me through that voice. God said, not in that voice, but God spoke to me over that voice. And from that day on, I refused to be what my mother was. I had this knowing that I was made for more. Mind you, I didn't know God. I just knew in my soul that there was something more just on the other side. And so I went through about 3 years of what they now call trafficking. And at that point, I didn't know. But there was a specific time that caused, I blamed myself for many years of my parents splitting up and my siblings being split. Specific time, my siblings and I were at the park, and they had decided to open the park pool. So I took them home to get dressed. And when I took them home to get dressed, I was the last one to get dressed. Well, there was a man that showed up, and I knew this man already because this man had already had his way with me before. And so I knew why he was there. My mother, yet again, is pale faced looking at me. And I go into the restroom to change clothes. And when I come out, all my siblings are gone. And I said, "What did you do? Where are they at? Where'd everybody go?" And she said, "Well, I went ahead and sent him ahead of you and sent him to the pool, sent him back to the park." Mind you, they were all under the age of 10. Okay. And this was in Amarillo, Texas. It's not a huge city, but it's a decent sized city. And there's a lot of crime and a lot of things that goes on in Amarillo, Texas. It's a very desolate place. They were gone, and I told my mom, I got to go get them. And so I went to walk out the door, and she grabbed me and she told me, "No, don't go. Just go with I'm not going to reveal his name because of circumstances. But there was a young man, and that young man said, 'Well, you're going with me.' And my mom had convinced me, 'Please go with him. Just go get me a soda and bring it back. He's just going to bring you right back. He'll drop you off at the park.' And I already knew if I didn't comply, it was only going to hold me up even longer. And so unwillingly, I got into the car and I left with him.
You were how old at this age?
I was about 12, 11 or 12. And I got in the car, and mind you, I'd been working out with the high school football team because I'm just a very athletic person, and I was in middle school, but I was working out. I got one of the coaches to hook me up with one of the high school coaches and allow me to use the gym and work out. And so I had been working out all summer long, and I had built up my strength. So I was like thinking in my head, "I got this. I'm going to be able to get away." And he drives past the park where my sisters and brothers were walking to, and I seen them through the window walking, and they were pretty close. They were walking in the area that the park was, right across from the park. And so seeing that, it gave me peace, right? That at least they were there and they were going to be watched. The guy drives around the corner and up to these apartments that are right at catty corner from this park. And he takes a left, and he goes all the way to the end, to the very last building of these apartments that are 2 stories high. And the man walks around, gets out of the car, and turns off the car and tells me, "All right, get out." And I was like, "No, I'm not getting out." And he shuts the door and he walks around and he goes to open the door, and I lock it. And we go back and forth struggle there for a moment until he unlocks it and then I lock it. And I'm pushing and holding the door. I've got my foot because this time I couldn't catch it in time. And I've got my foot pressed up against the side of the panel of the in between the doors. And I'm holding the door and pulling it as hard as I can. And he yanks it open. And when he gets it open, he takes me and throws me over his shoulder. I'm kicking and I'm screaming. Mind you, there's people all throughout this complex that are outside watching me. And nobody said anything. This man carried me up the stairs to a second floor apartment. And when he got me into the apartment, he threw me onto the couch like a rag doll, began to choke me, and told me that I was going to behave. And I wasn't. Everything in me said, no, I'm fighting this time. I'm done just laying down. I'm done just being used. I'm done. And I honestly thought I had it in me, and I was fighting. I was fighting. And he would grab me by my hair, and he grabbed me and bit me on my neck so hard that it drew blood. I had a busted lip. I had this big hickey on the side of my neck where he was grabbing and biting on me. I remember just fighting and kicking, and I don't know who I was talking to, brother. Now I know, but at the time, I don't know what was going through my brain, but I just remember, now I know it was me praying, but back then I thought it was just me wishful thinking. And I was like, please let somebody just knock on the door, distract them. Please, somebody help me. Please, somebody help me. Please let my mom show up. And somebody knocked. And just for a moment, he stopped. And he stood up, and when I tried to stand up, he pushed me back down to the couch. And he opened the door, and it was my mother, standing there with a pale face. Looked like life had left her. I couldn't explain the look. But when she walked in, I screamed out to her, Mom. And she walked past me. And she told him, I need another 20. You've been gone too long. And my heart sank as he walked over to the freezer and grabbed a plate. And he handed her another 20. And he said to her, if she didn't start acting right, you're going to owe me more than that 20. And she went to the bathroom and shut and locked the door. So the man then grabbed me by my hair and pulled me to his bedroom. And I watched this evil in my face. It wasn't even like I seen a person. It was like all I could see was this dark shadow standing over me with hot breath. It was just so weird. I could never explain it in detail, like what I actually saw. And I continue to fight. And as I continue to fight, he took his hand and was trying to force it down my pants. And in the process, he had a ring on that cut me open, about 4-inch cut in my private areas. He got a phone call. And in the phone call, he set up and he says, I have to leave. And when I get back, you better be acting right. And so he went and knocked on the door and told my mom he was going to be back. And when he got back, that B word, better have some sense, or else I'm going to take it out and you're going to owe me more than that. And so he left, and I knocked and banged and banged and banged on the door. And I said, Mom, please just open. I have to leave. I have to leave. Why I didn't just leave, I don't know. She would have never known I was gone. I don't know why I didn't. But she came out and she said, you can't. She looked at me with this pale, gross look. She says, you can't leave. Because if you do, he's gonna hurt me. And I just remember, I don't want you to be hurt. Just leave with me. She says, no, I can't. I said, Mom, yes, you can. He's gone. Just leave with me. She said, I can't. So she went into the room and she said, if you want to leave, this guy had a dresser full of quarters on top of his dresser, tons of quarters just piled up. And she said, if you want to leave, take this and cash it in. Give me $20 in cash, because I can't give him quarters. He'll know that I took it from him. So I had to go walk to the store. Mind you, we're on one side of the apartment complex. I've got to walk through this huge parking lot in the middle of this complex. And there's people outside barbecuing. It's the middle of summer. So there's people out there barbecuing and laughing and kids playing. And I didn't fix myself. I didn't wash my face. I had on a pair of baby blue shorts and blood was running down my leg. My hair was in a mess. My lip was busted. And I'm walking through this apartment complex. And nobody said a word, brother. Nobody said a word, not one single word. And I walked into this store, this corner store, and I cashed in this money. It was about 6 people or so in the store. Nobody said a word. Had nothing. And I walked the money back and I gave it to her. And when I did, I took off. I took off running as fast as I can, passing up the park, passing up a friend of mine's house, and I ran back home. And this is how the enemy works. I wasn't running back home to get help. I wasn't running back home to save myself. I was running back home so that I could get dressed and get cleaned up and take off to the park for my brothers and sisters before my dad ever knew, so that they wouldn't fight again. And I had believed that I had to carry the responsibilities of being a referee and a parent at such a young age. And when I got there, my dad was sitting on the front porch and he yelled at me, "Where's your mom? Where is she at? Take me to her right now." He's looking at me in the way that I'm looking, and he never said anything about it. He just said, "Where's she at?" And I took her there. I took him to where she was, and he kicked in the door and pulled her out of there and took her home. Nobody ever said anything. Nobody ever said, "Let's take you to the hospital." They didn't say anything. Unless they fought, they just kept fighting. I got dressed and cleaned up, and I walked to the park and got my brothers and sisters and brought them back home. Took them to the back room and pretended to tell them scary stories so that we could turn off the lights and they could just not listen. But that very next morning, my stepfather packed their bags and taken my siblings, the youngest 4. My mother threatened him and said if he took us, that she would press charges because we weren't his. And so we split. And it just got worse from there. Food in the refrigerator was sold. Food stamps were sold. We had nothing. Electricity was getting turned off. Water was getting turned off. Gas was getting turned off. We were living off of old cans of food that were in the pantry. My mom was gone for days at a time. It became a trap house. People from the streets would come in. We would have prostitutes and pimps and other addicts would come in and basically stay there. And my siblings and I resorted to one bedroom in the front of the house on a California king-size bed. We all slept together. Our house was shot up because my mother had ripped some people off. And I lived that way for quite some time. But I didn't know then that the enemy was trying to take me out. I didn't know then that the enemy was at work in my mother and many other people that was around me. I had no idea. I thought this was normal. I thought that people had went through this, and I was so angry that I would pick fights with people. I was so angry. I wanted revenge. I wanted to not hurt. I wanted to not live. And again, attempted suicide yet again, and I failed. And in that, one of the dealers approached me and said, "Hey, you can make some money." And he handed me some stuff to sell. And I became a dealer, thinking that I was doing what was necessary. I was stealing from convenience stores, packs of noodles and the Vina sausages and beef jerky, trying to feed my siblings until my aunt came and took them. The enemy was definitely at work, an attempt to take me out at a very young age. I began dealing, and then once I was dealing, I was getting pretty good and I was making money. And in the process of it, I began to answer calls for a call center for an escort service. And then after I started doing that, I started figuring out I was pretty good at managing. And so I was picking up other women off the streets and basically pimping them out for more money, connecting them with higher buyers rather than the people that they were messing with. behind the street corners and off the Amarillo Boulevard. And so, me in my mind, I was thinking I was helping, but really I was just doing what the enemy wanted me to do, and that was becoming that monster that I never wanted to be, that I swore I would never be. I believe demons were at work long before I knew who God was. And it took me a long time to figure that out. I'm going to be honest, I never knew what I wanted to be. I never knew if I wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer or a mom. I didn't know any of that. What I did know is what I didn't want to be. And I lived my life according to that for a very long time. I was very angry, and I did stay in that way for a very long time. I was run by the enemy. And I'm not happy to say this, because now looking back, now being saved and walking with the Lord for 11 years, I look back and I'm disgusted by the things that I didn't see, the things that I had become. I'd become a monster in more ways than one. I was so angry that I allowed my anger and my bitterness to seep in, to take control of me. I'd become a Jezebel. I know that I did, because I was ugly and hateful to men. I degraded them on every opportunity that I had. I would shove a pistol in their mouth to prove a point in front of their entire group of friends just because I could. Mind you, I am 5 foot tall, 5 foot nothing. And at the time, I weighed about 125 pounds. And I was pretty much a shot caller on the Amarillo Boulevard, and a hit was put out for me. And my ex-husband I had just met at the time. He was coming out of being incarcerated. He was 18. He was in a boot camp, and I met him, and he heard about the hit that was put out on me. He knew the struggle, and he
How,
took me.
how old were you?
I was 15, about to be 16. In all of this, I had gotten pregnant, and for many purposes, I won't speak on the situation, because my daughter is an amazing woman of God, and I would never have her see the evil in the world as I have, nor would I ever want her to be detoured from her walk. But I had become pregnant. My ex-husband decided to take my daughter on as his own, and he grabbed me up and he made me flee Amarillo, Texas, and took me to another small town where we started our lives. And I tried to leave all of that hurt in the past and run away. And I'd built him up and put him on this pedestal as my savior. I was like, he's my knight in shining armor. But because I had still not dealt with any of the past trauma of being abused and neglected and misused all my life, I didn't know how to be a wife. I didn't know how to be a mother. I didn't know how to be anything other than angry. And so I thought I'd put away the past. But I was a very controlling woman. I had so many triggers that he couldn't hold my hand or walk up behind me. He couldn't be playful with me. I didn't like people touching me. I wasn't very loving. Um, and even as a mom, I would get so frustrated because I was so burnt out that my kids would come and talk to me and I would just freak out. I would never put my hands on anybody, but I was just angry. I was always just angry and frustrated. And I went through that, and I thought that I was doing what I should, and I had exhausted myself to the point I was in every PTO meeting, every classroom party. I was coaching, little dribblers basketball, coaching for 3 years. My kids were in every sport. My kids, we did picnics, we did all this stuff, and I thought I was being the perfect mom that I was supposed to be, that I never had. And that's how I was a mom. I was doing what I never had, what I thought I wanted. In the midst of it, I had not seen the anger and the venom poison that I was spewing into my family. And over a couple of years after being married, my ex-husband became an alcoholic, really bad. And he came so distant and so quiet. He wouldn't speak. He would go days without speaking to me. I don't think he actually ever meant to. I just think that he didn't know how to talk to me. And I've actually had to ask him for his forgiveness since me being saved. And I will say that he now walks with the Lord, but it took a long time. God had to show me that when I was in prison. And I had become a monster. He also had started also dabbling in drugs, and he had uh, would take money and disappear for the night, and I wouldn't know where he was, and it just got me more angry. It reminded me of my mom, and it disgusted me. And I moved my mom in with us on a couple of different occasions, my mom still being an active addict. And my husband would be sober. My husband at the time, he would be sober. And all of a sudden, my mother would be living with us and he would backslide. He would go and use. And I was so angry with him. And it took me a long time to realize I allowed the enemy in our household. How could I be angry with him when I allowed it? But God didn't show me that until later down the road. But I went through a divorce because I told him either you get help or I'm leaving. And he said just like this, well, alcohol is legal and I don't have a problem with it. You do. And if you leave, I want a divorce. That was the conversation that took place. Mind you, there was other people working in the background, whispering in his ear. There was a lot of different stuff going on, whispering in my ear. And we separated. And in that separation, he signed over custody of our children to his grandparents. And some really ugly dealings went on. And I fought for months trying to get my kids back. And because the only way that I knew how to make money, the enemy was there to whisper in my ear, well, you keep working all this overtime. If you just flip a stack, you can make some money really quick. So that's what I did. I did that and used my income tax and bought an attorney, and I ended up missing court, and they took my kids because it was a bad situation, everything that happened. And I ended up missing court and they took my kids. And I'll never forget that day. The enemy was there waiting to remind me I had just become my mother. The one thing I never wanted to be. The one thing I was so proud of is that I was a mother and a wife, and I had just lost it all in one breath. I'd walked away from my house, my car, my husband, and now my kids were gone and I had nothing. And the enemy was there to remind me, do you remember you didn't want to be like that? Well, here you go, alone, without your kids. And in that moment, I went and sought out an IV, and I used for the first time. I honestly was hoping that it was going to kill me, and it didn't. But I remember right before I did, my mother was in the room and a guy that I was dating, and they were laughing at me when I told them I was going to, and they just continued to laugh and said, that's not you. You would never do that. That's not who you are. You're better than that. And I told them flat out, how can you say that I'm better than this when everybody that I have loved has traded me in for this very substance? Make that make sense to me, and it didn't. And so I went on a year-long journey of IV using methamphetamines. And I walked away from my house. I walked away from my vehicle. I parked it up across the street from the police station and called the company and told them to come and get it. I wasn't paying anymore. It wasn't like I lost it all. I gave it up. I walked away from it, and I walked around with a backpack and couch hopped, stayed under a bridge, stayed at a friend's house, stayed in a field. And I went through this wanting to be numb. Little did I know in the process, there was a year-long, the very first time this town has ever done this, there was a year-long investigation, sealed investigation, nobody knew about, except for the cops that were involved. And I got picked up. And I got picked up after standing over a bridge. I went on a walk. I was walking from one town to the other in anger, and all of a sudden, my phone that I was listening to started playing worship music, which was strange to me because it wasn't in my playlist. So why it started playing worship music, I don't know, but I began to cry. And it was like midnight walking on the side road of this highway, I-40, walking from McLean, Texas to Shamrock, Texas, with half a gallon of whiskey and Crown Royal in my backpack. And I remember breaking down and my phone died. And when my phone died, I just cried and cried and cried. I couldn't stop sobbing. I seen a bridge. And again, the enemy continued to war with my brain, telling me that I was nothing and that I needed to just die. And so I walked up onto this bridge, and I was standing at the top of it. And I wanted to jump, and I was standing there and I yelled out to God and I said, I don't even know if you're real. But if you are, you need to come to me now because I can't do it anymore. I'm done. I'm tired. I have been beat down my whole life and I need you to do something. And at that moment, my phone rang. Mind you, my phone had died a few miles back and this dead phone had rang. And it was my ex-husband. And he said, where are you? I'm sending somebody to come get you. And I told him, no, don't send anybody. But it distracted me enough for me to climb down off the ledge. And I was so angry at this point now. My anger was pointed at the other people. And so I'm angry and I get off the bridge and I start to walk into town and a car pulls up to pick me up. And when they did, that car was a person that I really didn't care for, but I got in knowing that I shouldn't have got in, but I got in. I didn't want to, but I was tired of walking. It was dark. My phone was dead. And so I got in and we didn't get but a mile maybe. And as soon as she got over the county line, we got pulled over. And that night I got arrested on a charge for possession and an open container. Mind you, the possession, there was nothing. It was a pair of scales that was owned by the driver of the car and was put underneath the seat that I was the passenger seat. Now, today, I know that was God intervening. I went and did 90 days and they released me on a PR bond and I couldn't understand why. Why would they let me go? Why would they do that? And I found out later it was the law, and two, there was other things going on. And when they re-picked me up, I was waiting for my court date, but when they arrested me a few months later, they released me back into the situation because there was the sealed investigation. And they arrested me and my ex-husband at the same time and put me in and delivered me with seven new charges, manufacturing and delivering 6 times, and a possession. I went to prison on a 7-year sentence, my first time ever being in trouble. Went to prison on a 7-year sentence. And it was there that I was introduced to God. I had went to a revival once at 15 and I gave my life to Christ, but I didn't even know what any of that meant. And I didn't know anybody that I thought it was I thought it was a concert. I didn't even know what was going on truly. And I went to the front and this man prayed for me, but that was all that ever happened. I didn't know anybody that knew God. I didn't know anything about the Bible. I didn't know anything. So it was just a seed that was planted, and God showed me that later on. But as I set my 4 years out in prison, I turned my life over truly to God. And God had shown me the monster I was and the things that I had done and the pain that I had and the trauma that I had. And I spent 4 years and I'm thankful for every day. Because every day God kept teaching me new things that I needed to fix and new things that I needed to surrender over to Him and new ways to trust in Him and to know who He is in my life and how He always has been there. And when I left prison, and God just continued to bless me and bring me to people I could go and serve with and a church family that I could be a part of. And I didn't know how I knew this, but I just knew that it was all God working. And because of that obedience and because of me walking with the Lord, the enemy tried to send a man that was in sheep's clothing and said all the right things, but he was very abusive. I got trapped. I had cervical cancer and I wasn't supposed to even be able to have kids, but I had gotten pregnant. It was too far along to do anything, so I had to carry my son. He was premature because I was locked in a closet and beat with a hanger and induced into my labor. And I was stuck in the middle of this narcissistic battle and I'd seen the enemy in it. And so I ran. I left the situation after many years of going through it. Finally, God told me it's time to go. And so I did just that. And I had to get past that. I never walked away from God through all of that. I never stopped going to church. I never stopped. I was just trapped. And the enemy tried so hard to trap me back into that. And I didn't allow it. I got away from it. And this was about 5 years ago. I'm glad that I did. Because since that, God has continued to grow me and bless me. God, I believe, has sent me to reveal to people the true enemy and their tactics and the way that the enemy works and moves. And the enemy is not this big red devil that's standing in front of you with horns. No, on the contrary, it's not. It's a quiet voice that tells you that it's okay to do wrong. It's a friend whispering gossip in your ear. I want to show love and hope because that's what I wish I had then. And God allowed my testimony to be what our ministry is, and I absolutely love it. But it didn't happen overnight. It took me 4 years in isolation in prison to come free and to be freed from all of that stuff. And one night in prison, I was in county jail, and I knew that I had broke free because I had a dream that I was in a gymnasium, and it had bunk beds all the way, kind of like a county jail looks. And I was on this bottom bunk, and I remember being choked and I couldn't breathe, and I was fighting and swinging, and I couldn't see anything on top of me. It was just like a shadow, and I could feel it choking me. And I was trying to scream Jesus, and I couldn't because this thing was choking me. And as I kept swinging and swinging and swinging, finally I got it out. In Jesus' name. And I screamed as loud as I could, and I fell out of the bed, and finally this thing was off of my throat. And I looked around, and I seen some people that I knew, and I got up and I walked, and I was like, I'm going to go to the restroom. And I walked, and there was this tall, dark person that was standing there. And I couldn't really make out the face. It was distorted, but it had on a gold shirt with a blue jacket over it and a purple hat. And I remember seeing the person, and I reached over and I was like, I'm sorry, sir, you look like you're kind of down. Is everything okay? And I remember speaking to this thing, and this thing reached out without warning and grabbed me up into a bear hug, and we fell to the ground, hitting a bathroom door. And as we hit this bathroom door and fell to the floor, that thing disappeared. And I looked up, and there was red stall doors. And I knew that day that God had showed me I'd finally confronted the enemy that was inside of me for so long. Also revealed to me that darkness that was inside of me. I'd finally been set free that day. And I've spent my life, I know that I could never repay God for the things that he'd done for me. Never. But I will spend the rest of my life doing everything I can as if it was possible. Because I know that it's possible to be set free from such a past and such a demonic force. I know that in spiritual warfare, people grow weary because they don't get the answer right away. They don't get the breakthrough right away. But God is faithful. And each one of us have to walk out our testimony. Each one of us have to continue in the faith to fight the good fight, to not give up, because the enemy wants us to give up. But when God brings you out on the other side, every single thing that you went through will be used for good, for the glory of God. And if we stand on that, like I stood on that, and I will not be persuaded any other way. God has blessed me, brother. God has blessed me with an amazing man of God that I couldn't have even wrote a letter out and asking God for. He gave me more than I could have asked for. And then slowly over time, God has gifted me with a child when I didn't even think I was possible that I had one. And he's not only done that, but he has restored to me my children that I lost in the process. And I want to say, anybody who is searching for wholeness, for belonging, for healing, to be set free of the things that see people, the world wants to put clothes on you that don't belong to you, but God says, I'm going to give you a robe of righteousness, a new robe that's clean without blemish. But see, we have to trust God to give it to us. We got to rip off of the old clothes. In the Bible, it tells us to rip off the new, to tear it away. And that means the things that are hidden in that vault that you don't want anybody to know, because you don't want to seem weak. You don't want to seem disgusting. You know, it breaks my heart that I have to say this, but I was with more men than I could ever count before I was even able to multiply. And I'm not happy about that. And it made me feel so gross inside for so long. that I just couldn't. I had so much bitterness and unforgiveness that I was mean and hateful to the world, like it was their fault. But God showed me the enemy uses people, and those people were once broken too.
Tamara,
Yes, sir.
of all the years, through everything that you've gone through, see, because God showed me this too. He gave me a message called "Gathered Up the Fragments," is where the disciples had fed the 5,000, and the Lord told him to gather up the fragments. And what
Mm.
God showed me is that everything that I had gone through in my life, if any of it had been changed, I would not know the Lord the way I know him now.
Oh,
He basically gathered up all the fragments to make a loaf. Let me
yes.
ask you, everything that you have gone through in life, what is the most important thing you have learned?
The expectations I put on others because of what the enemy had worked in me for so long was unreasonable, and it was unfair. And in that, I was creating a stronghold for them that they could never get over. They could never obtain anything worth having because I had put this unreasonable expectation on them. And God had shown me that through all of this, it didn't make me disgusting, but it made me who I'm supposed to be. What it showed me is that my testimony was necessary to build me to be who I am, so that I could be sent out to do his work, to bring home those who were lost, and to fight for those who were forgotten. That healing is not for just a select few, that it is possible for everyone as we lean on Christ, as you come to know him, as you get to know him. It's not a thing that just is by what we deserve, um, but what he did for us, not because we love him, but because he first loved us. And it's possible. There is a new life waiting for you. All you have to do is make the decision.
Tamara, I appreciate this interview.